Uh, Jack should be there.
And I think Pete's going to join us too. Oh, cool. Here's Linus. Leonard, we're doing this call for your time. You're supposed to be like wide awake, like totally.
Yeah, actually, I was up super late last night, so.
Okay, that explains it. I'm like, you're the one who's like supposed to be peppy.
Yeah, but hopefully it's better than, I mean, 8 a.m. seems to me like seems really brutal on the on the Pacific side, anyways.
Yeah, well, I normally wake up at 6, and so 9 p.m. is brutal on me. Can't please everybody.
I know, so sorry. If only like there were no time zones. If only the sun would stay in one spot over the flat Earth, then we'd be fine.
That'd be great.
I'm
But
sure.
that's next after we finish this project.
Oh, good.
We'd still have early risers and late risers. We'd still
That's
have
true.
that.
That's true.
How do the flat earthers explain time zones again?
It
How do they
goes
explain
around the
Perimeter.
disk on the
Around the
edge,
disk.
the perimeter of the disk.
And
I know too much of this.
And doesn't China have like one big time zone, or is that India?
India does. I think China does too.
Yeah, one of the really big countries has one time zone, sort of just to keep their things together.
I'm forcing several
Yeah,
groups
I
to do Zulu time.
Yeah.
No
Yeah,
time
I think
zones,
China
daylight
has
savings.
like one gigantic time zone.
India is weird too.
Bad,
They're
but
30
internet-
minutes offset from the rest of the world.
Yeah, exactly. They're half hour off, just to be different.
Mhm.
I remember Russia actually, I don't know if it's still true, but at some point, Russian sailors were staying on Russian time all the time they were traveling through the world. So they would be offset from wherever they were.
Man.
Yep. Well, it's one way to avoid jet lag.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm on a mailing list that's about telecom stuff, but has suddenly dissolved into a wonderful conversation about early railroads and what happened across the U.S. around the development of early railroads. And I just learned about Fred Harvey, who started a bunch of restaurants called Harvey House on the stops in Kansas, starting in Kansas, then moving across. But originally the Kansas Pacific Railroad, and then he becomes the first sort of restaurant entrepreneur with a chain, etc. There's Jack. Go ahead, Marc-Antoine.
Okay, good. I was wondering because he was telling me, hey, I'm having trouble with the link.
Okay, good. He has succeeded in joining us.
Okay, so I think this is it.
Jump on in. Pete, I don't know. I haven't heard from
You'll
him.
have to allow screen sharing.
Oh, sorry about that.
We all have to be reminded.
Yeah. There we go. Cool.
Okay. Do you see
Yes.
me? Okay, I do have the window. I don't know what impact it will have on, but I should be able. Okay, so recording.
Yes.
So this was put together a bit fast, and I just want to preface with say I did not have time to practice. I just want to preface saying this is at this point of vision. There's very little. There's been experiments. There's quite a few experiments at this point, but this does not exist yet. But it's what I'm busy building. So. Okay, so we'll work through quite a few topics. This is just table of contents, so we can situate, but I do want us to start with what am I trying to achieve and what are we trying to achieve? And some of it is parallel, some of it isn't. So of course, there's all the great large-scale goals, collective intelligence, deliberative democracy, emergent organization. We all want all this. What does it mean concretely? I will focus on this sentence. What I'm doing technically is continuous interweaving of evolving personal knowledge maps into a federated knowing garden. And we'll get back into how this is necessary for all these other goals. So first, when we say, I will use topic maps, and this is something I got from Jack, to represent knowledge instead of myriad other ways that have been invented to represent knowledge. So I say knowledge maps in a broad sense. So let's focus first on the knowledge map. We'll unwrap that sentence progressively. So what's a knowledge map? Well, first, topics have identifiers, and then they have, in semiotic terms, you can think of the topic itself as the signified, like the concept, something in our mind up to a point. It's a stand-in for something in our mind. And we have identifiers, which are names, nouns, something that refers to the thing. So there's this classic semiotic triangle. And we'll come back to that, a many-to-many relationship between public and identifiers and topics. Names can refer to one name can refer to many things. One thing can have many names. It's not obvious. And a lot of people have trouble understanding one another thanks to vocabulary conflicts.
And we often assume we're talking about the same thing when in fact we're not.
It is the basis of most illusionary agreement. Then names have attributes. This is not unlike RDF at some point. You'll see, if you're familiar with RDF, you'll recognize things. So you have a named attribute and you say, well, this attribute has this value, and it can be text, it can be anything, could be a video, it doesn't matter. And then you have another type of topic, which is an association, which has where the named attribute, like here, Jeremy Halki, who's a person, uses a tool, which is the brain. And so we have association here, tool usage, between the user and the tool. And so these are roles. In this association, this person is playing the user role, and this software is playing the tool role. So we have this kind of generic schema in topic maps, whereas every association has a relation type, every actor has an actor type as being an actor, but it playing this role in this relation defines a role type. And so here, as I said, we have, this is the actor type, this is the relation type, these are the role types, and we see how this schema applies. Now, this is, here because I wanted to save space, I had a binary association as in RDF, but it could be an n-ary association. You could also have a goal, John gives a ball to Mary to make her happy. So these are all roles around the giving association. And you can have multiple values. I can give a ball to Mary and Jane. So there's a lot of things that seem obvious and aren't, but overall it's pretty simple so far. What is more interesting is everything is a topic. Everything's a topic means this association is also a topic, so I can have it as the target of another association. I'm saying, and I is not represented here for space, but that would be another person topic. I'm saying that Jerry uses the brain. Or you could have somebody doubting that, or somebody comparing Jerry's usage of the brain with Marc-Antoine's usage of some other tool. So these, you can have layers, and you can go meta as much as you want. So everything's a topic. Anything you can name is a topic. So topic as actor, the role player, all these types are also topics. The biography, I didn't go into that, but everything has a provenance and a biography. Why do you know that? What's the source? Where was that said? So these are all topics. Anything in the system has an identifier, including what you just said. You can always go meta. So this forms a generalized hypergraph. And I think this is very important for conversations. When we're holding a conversation, you want to be able to, I want to speak about what you just said, and you want to speak about me speaking about what you just said, and so on. So note the difference with RDF. Every statement has an identifier. The fact, even, let me go a bit micro, the fact that this is, this string is the purpose attribute of this association, that micro attribute is also a topic and can be spoken about and can be put in doubt and can be evaluated and so on. And the final ingredient of topic maps is called topic merging, but I'll get back to that later. Now, we have topic maps, good. but we said evolving personal knowledge maps. So to make these things evolve, let's wrap them in event streams. So that's pretty classic because we change ideas. Mental models evolve. As we talk, as we exchange, as we think, ideas, knowledge maps, concept maps in our head change, and I expect concept maps in the computer to evolve. So event sourcing paradigm, so we call the event sourcing paradigm is very well established now. It says event streams are a source of truth, not source of the truth, but as opposed to the state of the system that you could compute from the events. If you want to know what really happened, don't look at the state because the state might have gotten corrupted. Look at the events. The state, what is the system state really is the event stream itself. So you keep the whole history. And that's important if you're interested again in genealogy and where did the idea come from, which happens sometimes. And that means that state conflict resolution, instead of saying this is my state, this is your state, especially if you're dealing with the CAP theorem, computers get desynchronized. Instead of worrying, oh, can I resolve these states? Well, you're doing event conflict resolution. Often simpler, not always. Event resolution, it can mean operational transforms, which are not simple. But in many cases, you can do something that's known as CRDT, conflict-free replication data type. And that means basically that you make sure that your events are designed in a way that they don't create conflicts. Downside, the state calculation can be heavy. So how do you solve that? Well, there's ways, I'll get back into the details of that, but you can take snapshots and then just take the events from that snapshot. You can do indexing, you can do all kinds of things to mitigate that issue. So the solution basically is to take these topic maps. This is a symbolized topic map with topics and association and attributes, and say wrap each of the micro elements of the topic map into an event. And this is a stream, and the stream constructs the topic map. So a few details that are not in the diagram. Events can declare that they invalidate certain previous events. In many, if you look at data log, for example, you make a claim, which is a tuple, which is not, equivalent in some ways to what's happening in a topic map. Well, you're saying in data log, you can either assert or, I don't know what the exact term is, but object to a tuple or unassert, if you will. Now, then you have to care about ordering. So this is why I'm saying, no, don't think of it as this claim as negates that claim. Think of it as this event negates that event. So you're sensitive to event, you're making the event order relationship explicit as an event attribute. And that means that even if you receive them out of order, it's not a big deal because the order is explicit in the event. And invalidating events also allow stream compression. And other events can share the same bus. Whoops. What's happened here? So for example, if you have document edits, which would have nothing to do with HyperKnowledge, but if you have event streams, you can put any type of event you want, including things that have nothing to do with HyperKnowledge. But there's other HyperKnowledge relevant events that we'll see soon, including something about stream merging. So, okay, I said, let's have streams, fine. And there's advantages and disadvantages. Why? Why would you want streams? So the basic point is I'm trying to model what happens in conversations so I can scale it up. So first, we're speaking about an individual point of view. Because we did say evolving personal knowledge maps. That's the starting point. So you have individual point of view. You start, this is what I think about a certain thing. You could have also something even smaller, a scratchpad for a hypothesis. Oh, what if? And then you have assertions about a counterfactual or hypothetical state of the world. And then you see what are the consequences of that. How is the, for example, if there's a causality graph embedded in the topic map, how would it be affected by these counterfactuals? It could be just rough work. And if you're happy, you merge it back. Because it's events, you can just merge the events at the end of the stream. So that's going smaller, or you could have one stream per topic. But if the stream itself is a topic. So that means if we create this counterfactual world, we can refer to it and say, well, in that case, I can compare that counterfactual to that counterfactual. It becomes a universe of discourse. But what's useful is when you want to go bigger into groups, continuous interweaving. We want these individual maps to become larger and larger maps. So if mental models evolve through exchange of ideas, we want to model both the model changing, and the communication act that represents the exchange. So basically you'll have group members defining, they each have their own stream, but they define another stream for the shared space. So individual contributions can be merged, and I want to make it clear, I'm using the GitHub vocabulary. I want knowledge maps to be treated like we treat code in GitHub. We can fork, we can merge, we can rebase, we can diff. And for me, that's extremely important. We're comparing ideas, and creating a knowledge map is extremely idiosyncratic. We'll all create knowledge maps in a different way. The question is, can we then match what I've done with what you've done? And there's work that's been done on that. Easterbrook has done some fascinating work on that. But what I'm trying to do right now is at the communication level, how to do those merges. So we would each have our individual events merge into that common stream. So we're creating a composite topic map. But of course, that can introduce contradictions. You say one thing, I say something else. So you want to know what you're merging in advance to resolve contradictions. Ideally, like we resolve conflicts in Git before merging. So it's the same story. So we want to diff. Oh, how is this stream different from that stream? How is this map different from that map at the stream level? What's a contradiction? Well, it depends on the logic model and the ontology, and that is application specific. I'm not saying it's not a concern of HyperKnowledge, it is, but it's going to be very much at the individual application level. Now, I expect many conversations to end up, possibly, with something formal in an ontology so they can define what's a contradiction. Like, for example, this attribute has to have a single value. So if we have a contradiction, that kind of stuff, a very basic level. But this is something you achieve through conversation. So allow each community stream to define its own rules, its own contradiction detection mechanisms and rules. This is still something that's, to be absolutely honest, totally hand-wavy about my project, but I do expect to be able to reuse a lot of the RDF-OL stuff, even in a different context, which is topic maps, but I did look, it's not that hard to adapt. But what you're looking about is mostly constraints of cardinality and type, and the same applies in the topic map world, except it's a different arity, but other than that. So you have this one stream that has kind of everybody's contribution. So we remain aware of new elements and new contradictions. So if you say something that contradicts something I've said in my stream, I would be alerted. Hey, your position is being attacked here. And some events in the stream will summarize, and that's extremely important. There's the event saying, I've said this, you've said that, somebody else has said that, but there's an event saying, well, the overall result is actually most people have said pretty much the same thing, or not. They've said different things, so there's a dissensus here, and we have to resolve the contradiction. So I expect events that speak about this plurality of values. And probably there could be either another stream or a subset of that mainstream, which is only the agreed upon, the consensus part. So contradictions are resolved before merge in that subsection. And we'd have an agreement mechanism. How do we actually resolve it? There's detecting contradiction, there's resolving it. And that's a social problem. And that is definitely out of bounds. Or at least I expect a lot of social mechanisms to be defined at a layer above HyperKnowledge. So basically, merging events from one stream to another is a way to share knowledge. From one viewpoint, it's about going between viewpoints, individual or collective, like it could be my stream, it could be our stream, to another. And that way it's analog to human communication. Another possibility, once we have merged, is computations. So for example, I spoke of these summarization events. Well, you could have a service that's looking at, he said that, she said that, you said that, and then creating this, you know, okay, this is this person's stream here, this is this person's stream, creating this picture. And there's the service that subscribes to both of these and creates these composite things and creates the composite view with more elements. So this is a small group. And at some point, we want to federate those groups. And this is where it gets interesting. We're speaking about making this large scale. Large scale doesn't necessarily mean there will be one stream with everybody's contributions. That's, in a way, unusable. But it will be fractal. You know, teams, people belong to many teams, and they may share things across from one team or another. I expect some federations to be around certain domains of knowledge, or sometimes teams are part of an organization and there's the common knowledge of the organization. So really there's a fractal pattern of composition and probably tangled hierarchies as well. So from the individual to the team, organization, thematic knowledge hubs, this is topic quest inspired vocabulary, to a global knowing garden. We'll get back on all that means, but I think you're beginning to see the picture. It's about making those views of knowledge mesh. How am I doing for time? Okay, privacy, there's a question of privacy. People want to work in private or in closed groups, often, not always. But working in teams requires public commitment. And here, I'm not claiming to have a magic solution. I'm just saying the problem exists, has to be contended with. But I think it's important to allow both of these to exist. We need private closed groups because you want to limit accountability for work in progress. People are afraid, legitimately, to show their work, because if it's something that is not yet not yet checked, they can get hell for it. It's a way to speak truth to power. You need anonymity sometimes in abusive or autocratic situations, but it's also a way to spread lies without accountability. So nothing is perfect. There are situations where you need privacy. There are situations where you need public verifiable identity and public commitment. For example, pledging a contribution to a project, that is worth much more than a vote. You're saying, I will work for this. Not, I think this is a good idea. It's a very different, like in Occupy, they had this vote against versus veto. I'm saying this is the symmetrical of that. Vote for versus, I'll make this happen. So this is not an alternative, we need both. So how will we realize both? On the privacy side, data ownership depends on data storage. So I'm intentionally agnostic about storage. You can store your cure privately in your browser. It can be an encrypted event chain in the distributed web. I'm looking at IPFS a lot. I'm looking at IPELD a lot. I'm looking at Holochain. I'm looking at a lot of distributed web solutions. Those are all valid. Then you encrypt it. Problem with encryption, let's be aware of it. Encryption has a half-life. If it's the problem with the distributed web is the data is there forever and it will get decrypted someday. It can be, and that way Holochain separating the headers from the content and keeping the content private, I think has a better idea. It can be encrypted event chain as server control. That's good. On someone else's server, again, if you have, I need to disable this, 1 second. If you have a server you do not control, well, if it's encrypted, it can still remain private. And of course, you can have an encrypted events if you don't care about keeping things private. That's fine. So you would define access control lists and permissions at the stream level. And if I want to give a different access to part of the stream, well, you define I spoke a bit, I'll go into more detail about that, but you define a slice or a substream and say, okay, I want to give you access to this part of my global thought, republish it as a different stream with a different permission and maybe re-encrypt for a different key. But it's easier if the ACL is at the stream level rather than the event level. And as for commitment, well, classic solution, public key signature based on identity. There's a lot of solutions, web of trust, distributed identity. I'm watching that space. I think strong identity, I'm interested in deliberative democracy. I made it very clear. So I'm very interested in strong identity, one that is backed by, you know, the same organizations that back your right to vote. So this is not directly HyperKnowledge concern, but I want to support strong identity as something that happens in the platform. And ideally, what you would want is unique anonymous identity backed by a strong identity. So you could say, because I have the strong identity, I have one alias. You don't know what my alias is, but you know I have exactly one. Somebody needs to solve that problem. It's been done actually, but not that easy and not that mainstream. And anyway, that's, I mean, let's face it, it's hard to get strong identity. It's not exactly a problem I'm working on, but I'm saying it's a problem I need solved for the grand goals. At a more down-to-earth level, topics, the idea of topic maps came from the back of the book index. You have a page and you speak about something, you have topics existing in document. Anything you can speak about is a topic, and topics are in anything you say, including documents, conversations, chats, chat rooms, you name it. So who will identify the topics in the documents? Of course, we can ask the authors to say, this is this topic with markup. We can ask an AI to identify topics with all the risks of finding misidentifying topics. You can ask the readers. You can crowdsource, and that was what I did with one of my first collective intelligence efforts. And I think there's something there, but the reality is we did say creating topic maps or any knowledge map is idiosyncratic. Then this becomes a resolution problem. But this is what this is about. Can we also crowdsource the resolution problem? I think it's doable. But in all cases, whatever it is, identifying topics is a skill, whoever does it. We will need a mentorship structure. There's a whole social structure that has to go with this. Showing topics in document is actually non-trivial. The topic can be, we often think of entity identification in text. Okay, you make the text blue and this is this company or this person. But the topic can be an implicit premise. There's no text anchor. It can be an argument for a relationship between situations. So this situation is a text span, this situation is a text span. The argument between them is not necessarily anchored to one word, or it can overlap, or it can be identified a posteriori, not by the author. So you have the annotation is fighting with markup. It can be anchored on text that is still being edited, and so on and so forth. This is all doable, but this is all non-trivial. I'm saying in general, I expect topic identification to be more external than markup. I don't just count on the author. I think that in general, we discover concepts as we discuss them. So identifying concepts in the early conversation, the concepts will have come after the conversation. And even in documents, we'll discover, oh, this is actually what led to that. So on the other hand, once you've done that, you want to represent the topic, and you can identify elements in, around, and outside the text. Outside means you can have a map besides the text. Around, I believe, is extremely important. You can use the margins to draw the links between the elements. There's a lot of things that are possible. I just want to give an idea. This is, I don't have UX for this. I'm doing a protocol, but I just want to point out that these are difficulties I'm foreseeing. By the way, I see your pictures here. I don't know if you see your pictures or if you see the text. I think.
So the Zoom interface with our tiles, we do not see. It's transparent.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping.
So we're seeing the full text, no problem.
Excellent. I was having trouble reading myself.
You can make our picture small. There's a menu on top.
No,
of the
it's
tiles.
fine now. I put it
Okay.
at the bottom. I'm okay.
Cool.
Time is very important. Documents and conversations evolve over time. They're created, they're modified. Sometimes they're published, and we have a point in time instead of a duration. But the concept evolves in time. The definition of the concept evolves in time. And the identification of the topic evolves in time. As I said, we'll go from this informal conversation, and it becomes more structured, and it can become a knowledge map with identified topics. All this, that's another reason I'm insisting so much on time streams. We want to understand the different times of the concept evolution and how they interact. Sometimes we need to understand where the idea came from. For example, when we do a postmortem, we took this decision 6 months ago, it worked, it didn't work, what worked, what didn't work, why did we take that decision? But most of the time, we don't care about the historical perspective. What we just want is, we arrived at an older document because that's what the search led us to, and we actually want to know, okay, what's the latest status on this? And so we want to have this constant refactoring in a way of documents to point to, okay, this is the latest synthetic view of what is being thought of about this. These are dimensions of time, and they're all anchored. Usually you access them through documents. They're anchored in documents. So you want to make that clear. But doing that requires knowing, oh, this topic was identified at this moment in that document, which may have been made at a different time, and was later modified, and it's now this is the final version, and that's addressed in that document or that conversation. Now, streams in practice, still good. I'm rushing through this material, sorry. It's good to have I said, okay, we have a stream, it's nice, there's some computation involved. We don't want to do the computation most of the time. I mean, the stream can go huge over time, and if we do federation, we can have humongous streams that federate many events from many people. You cannot have a thin client take this fire hose to compute the state, obviously. So we must be able to use the stream as a queryable data set. At the simplest level, you must just be able to say, okay, well, and now I'm going to work in the client-server paradigm, and I'll explain how to extend to distributed web afterwards. But basically, you have a storage unit which hosts many streams, maybe one, maybe many. And it should keep an index, this stream, this topic, this time gives me, it's stored in this event. So you'd have a kind of key value store. And so you're able to say, if I'm looking at this stream and I want this topic, here are all the events that have, any event will usually have multiple topics. So this is an index that is constructed a bit differently, but in most databases, you can just declare that from an array, for example, in Postgres. And so you can make simple queries, all events about this topic since this time. Since this time is useful when you're catching up after a reconnection. All events about a combination of topics since this time, because you can name any times and combine that. And you'll have to filter that through another table for event invalidation, but that's still pretty straightforward. So that's the bottom layer, if you will. Actually, the bottom layer is event invalidation. Above that is topic indexing. Then you have another layer, which is collections. You can define a collection of a topic, a set, if you will, as a topic. Sometimes you'll do it, if you remember your mathematics, by extension or by intention. The easiest way is by extension. This is a member, this is a member, this is a member. And once you have a name connection, a collection, you can use it to enrich your queries. Very simply, you say, well, this collection, type T, I'm declaring, well, it's all topics of type T. Here it's by intention, but it could very well be implemented by extension. It's just a bunch of events. And so I want all events mentioning a topic of type T. Well, I can say in the type T container. So collections, materialized collections become a way to handle abstraction. And once you have collections, you can do curated views. And I think that's extremely important when you have a group of people discussing, there's all the topics that are in the stream that are discussed, but you want to say, okay, we're focusing on this little thing. And I'm talking about this topic, this topic, this topic, and how they interact. So that's a curated view. And you can define it using collection and some meta information for the placement of items in the view. And here's the really, really difficult layer. You know, if you have ontologists and librarians, you have a guaranteed one-to-one relationship between IDs and words, topics and identifiers, but this is not true in general. I did say earlier, there's this many-to-many relationship between topics and their identifiers. And so when you're referring to a global identifier, and these are lots of quotes around global, somebody's global identifier may be somebody else's local identifier, but basically a global identifier is something that's being used outside of my stream. I'll map it to a canonical local. I'll say, this is my canonical local identifier for this topic in my stream. And this is what I'll use to build the index. It's entirely possible I'll use the global identifier as a local identifier, that's fine. But the point is I must have a unique identifier for each topic in this stream. And that means, oops. Come on, okay. When two streams, especially two streams in different storage spaces, which don't have access to how they map topics to canonical identifiers, are communicating, they need to negotiate. So before you can actually do the query, you have to say, well, this is all the names I'm using for that topic, some of which may be known to you. And by the way, I at some point discovered that this topic is the same as that topic. I thought they were distinct, but I merged them. And I said, way at the beginning, the last element of topic maps is topic merging. Well, this is a key element. I'm able to say these two topics are the same. So again, this gives me a bigger equivalence class for my identifiers. So you use those, share those between the two processes and say, oh, look, you're using that name for this name, so probably we mean the same thing. Presumably we mean the same thing. And then we look for contradictions. And then we negotiate and we realize, no, actually, when you're using that name, you mean this other thing that maybe I don't know about yet, or that I name differently with another topic. So, but basically, if you're not creating contradiction, assume tentatively, so there's a notion of tentative agreement between two streams and confirmed agreement. And if it causes new merges, like if the topics over here are forcing me to merge topics I had kept separate, be suspicious. So that's really the difficult part, but again, it's tractable. You have a global identifier, there's an algorithm for that, it's pretty well defined. So once you have all this, you have a higher level query that's aware of equivalence classes, collections, that allows me to define a slice. I'm saying all events about those topics in that collection or in that relation to those topics in that collection, because I can make that into a collection also and so include it. And so that's a slice, that's a substream from the original stream. I can, once I have a slice, I can give it a name. I can treat it like a different stream, give it a different access control list, subscribe to it. So it's possible for a thin client to define a substream corresponding to a query and keep updated about this is what I care about. And now, of course, because it's a continuous query, it imposes a computational cost on the storage unit, on the server, if you will. But it's also a good boundary for payment infrastructure if we ever get into payment, because in this society of agents, you're exchanging information. But if you're not, it's a reality that exchanging information means keeping people updated, and that means there is a cost to that. And hence it's a service. Doing a query without subscription, of course, is a much lower cost operation and should probably be free in most cases. What if there's no server? We're dealing with distributed web. We can, it's actually possible to have algorithms to federate queries on distributed web. IPLV did that. It's not easy, but I've seen that code. But what I'm proposing, which is much simpler as a first implementation at least, is to have the notion of cache. When I'm getting events from another server, another storage unit, or from the distributed web, I would probably want to cache them locally. So I will have a stream that is only a cache of another stream, or probably of a slice of another stream. And it makes sense because it's a known problem in the web that servers disappear. So if I'm referring to events from that other stream, I should keep a copy. And so once I kept a copy, well, I can do my own indexing. So everything I said about indexing becomes valid. And we can even have a service where you could have servers that gather data from the distributed web and provide indexing as a service. So that's another service in the broader ecosystem. No, okay, it's just being slow. So what would the query language itself look like? This is very much tentative, work in progress, but in JSON-LD, you can give local names to identifiers. So I'm calling, these are RDF identifiers in the case of JSON-LD, but you can say in this context, this is the local name I'm using, it's a simple name. So if you apply that to GraphQL, because GraphQL gives names to every attribute and association, you have a query language that's growable and that can refer to new concepts easily. GraphQL, normally a server says, this is my vocabulary, no more, no less. But here you'd use context to extend it to new identifiers and even sometimes to short paths and identifiers. I think this will be useful if to have short paths to traverse an association. Now, the result will not have a GraphQL shape because we want to give events back. Because we do dependency and validation relationships between events, we must be aware of the origin. Every result set must be an event set. So it's not pure GraphQL, but it should be close enough. And we want to be as much as we can. There's all this wonderful world out there of data, and we want to interoperate and we want to exchange. And ideally, we would love to do two-way round trips. Now, in reality, well, one way is easy because HyperKnowledge models a superset of most of these. So it can read this. But the other way is not true, or rather we can do it, but it's very painful because we need to create extra objects. It's in RDF, it's known as reification. We create an object that represents the statement. So it will be very, if I take an RDF statement, put it in HyperKnowledge, it gains an identifier. If I bring it back to RDF, it won't be the original triple. So it's not exactly a round trip. Still, it's useful enough for many cases, and we can certainly communicate and speak, most important, speak about anything that happens in those worlds, which I think is good enough. So this is tentative. I began to spoke about layers, how we can do this indexing and that indexing. So this is more the long story of that. Snapshots, I didn't mention snapshots, but they're a layer. You can say at some point, here is everything we know about this topic, and let's make it into a blob and index it as a blob. So then we can just look at events from that point and compress the stream, things like that. Event branching and merging, topic indexing, subclassing. These are all things that can, if you want to layer it like a very, very fine pastry. And this is basically to make the implementation easier. But but this is basically it. So you have all the pieces. The whole point of this is that once we have these events, we can begin to communicate about our ideas in a way that is more precise, because we can diff, because we can merge, because we can have this fractal federation. It allows identifying points of consensus, points of dissensus, and there's a lot more to say about what's the next layer above that. I mean, I'm speaking with Bentley. I should have been tomorrow, but fortunately I can't. About how do you actually represent arguments and counter arguments about this in this framework. And again, I expect a lot of that to be. This is not about doing everything. This is about having a common data bus, so many people can build an ecosystem of knowledge services and knowledge representation tools and knowledge enrichment tools. I expect this to become a waterway for a very collective enterprise. And this is what we mean by the knowing garden. There's the fractal unification of knowledge, but there's also everybody's contributing at the tool level, at the topic identification level, there's so many levels where everybody can be constructing this society of mind. Okay, sorry, as I said, I rushed through this.
Fortunately, on the inner tubes, there is pause and rerun and
slow down.
Rewind, right, exactly. So, and I think I followed a lot of it. I'm sure I missed a lot of stuff because I'm not at your level on the topic. I have to bounce off the call at 5 minutes after the top of the hour. I'm happy to leave the room open so this conversation can go as long as it needs to. And anybody have questions, thoughts? Do you want to stop sharing?
Well, real quick, who here is versed in the Society of Mind subject area?
Somewhat.
I've only heard of it.
It's Marvin Minsky, I think.
Yeah, Minsky's book, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Jerry and guys, I took Marvin Minsky's last class before he died, and IdeaFlow is my class project for it.
Whoa.
Yeah, and so it's really cool to be hearing people discussing this topic space, and I think it was sparked a lot of inspirations for me, though I have a lot of differences too.
Cool.
Marc-Antoine, can you stop sharing?
I was just going to say, unless people have specific questions on specific slides, that's... No? Okay, I'll stop. I can resume at need.
Cool. And that was fabulous because I was busy mapping how I use the brain and how I have conversations to what you were saying, and it worked. Like I was impressed by the degree to which all of this unpacks into code and indices and all this other kind of stuff that has to happen, right? And I'm busy slapping together nodes that have almost no metadata in a little mind map, and then hoping to just mash that together against somebody else up here at the conversational level. And so you just helped me visualize just exactly, or at least in one way, how much this unpacks into, which is a lot. It's a lot of stuff.
It's a big project.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people on this call have been on parallel projects for a long time. Other questions, other thoughts?
I was curious, what's the implementation state?
I did say there's experiments at this point. I've made a first experiment that could basically store events, and I had something very cute where I had high-level events that could be decomposed into low-level events by another system. So you could say, I'm doing this user operation, but I don't know how to do it, but I know that this other server can decompose it into, okay, it's actually this graph operation, that graph operation, that graph operation. So I played with that. but many things wrong about the identifiers mostly. So I'm restarting from scratch, and my putting it into layers is a way for me to make it manageable, but it's extremely early. It's very much at the vision level. I've been thinking about the specification for a long time and thinking about, oh, but should I, like things such as, you know, when I'm saying, oh, you don't cancel the event, you don't cancel the claim, you cancel the event. And many of those things were a lot of, okay, but what happens if? So.
Right. And how can you go back and refer to something later? And how can the earlier reference find its way back to the most recent reference? And. I mean, it's all these interesting contingencies. By the way, we should have a similar presentation by Rich Burden about the systems that he's building, because if you're sort of at the beginning of the rewrite stage, a lot of the stuff that he's built may actually fit your infrastructure very nicely.
Okay.
So I think that would be a super, super interesting conversation to have. And he's sort of a month away from, I think he's about a month away from being able to kind of do that for us.
Okay, excellent.
That'd be great. Other thoughts, questions?
So within a group.
Away from doing what? Sorry.
Jacob, from basically opening up a website and sort of talking about revealing a lot of the stuff that he and his team have been building.
Who was that?
Rich Burden, who was on an earlier FJB call. I think he was on one of them.
Cool.
Yep. Go ahead.
I was thinking, if within a group there are two different narratives and two different streams that are that the system would like to merge at some point and make them like convergent enough to have one narrative that is like coherent within internally. But if there are alternatives and events can be moved between, and if there are two streams that are breached by certain events and events can move and be merged from one to another, does it envision that there will be a mechanism to actively try to make the alternatives like go closer together? It's kind of opposite of divide and conquer type, because the alternative narratives tend to be amplified into being a separate beings, separate streams. And in Knowledge Garden, I understand that they should be encouraged to like come together more.
I think I'm not, I speak a lot about the federation and merging. It is not to mean that there needs to be one narrative to rule them all. I think it's about identifying the part that is common and the part that is divergent, so that you can work on the divergence. It's not, real divergences exist, and my goal is certainly not to erase them. But it's true that we have like real life diverging groups in society, because there's less and less of a common vocabulary. There's less and less of a common reference points in reality. Like, we're consuming different news, we're consuming different. And what I want to do at the political level, because yes, that's a question that I'm concerned with, is when somebody makes something, well, first on the vocabulary point, I want to make it possible to ask the question in a way that is cross vocabulary. There's a kind of, you know, you detect here that you're not using the word the same way, in that when you say this, you actually mean something I would name that. And it's not, I'm not saying that will be solved, but it can be detected and taken into account systematically. And then you can say, well, you're referring to this reality and to this description of the world. This is where we differ. And this is the event. I don't have trace of this event. It never happened in my worldview, or your event never happened in my worldview. Okay, can we dig into that? And can we, if somebody, like what I've observed in I was looking a lot at some point at the climate denialists. And in climate denialism, there are people who make these extremely cogent arguments against the climate change research. But I've noticed that they make this one argument and repeat it endlessly, and then it gets refuted, and then they never bother to refute the refutation. And if you look at the shape of refutation, you see that they're always coming back to this one argument, and they never take seriously refutation into account. So if we can visualize this is under attack, or this objection has never been answered, nobody bothered. So I'm sorry, your position may be very interesting in its own right, but there's a objection, and until you can answer it, your position is compromised. This is there's actually a whole branch of research called defeasible reasoning that is based on this logic system. Like, if it's been under attack, has the attack itself been attacked? Otherwise, the attack is standing. Yes, exactly. I saw Jerry was also
making comments. I just want to interject that the scenario you just described is one of my top of the list wish list items for the future of OGM, and the case, the user scenario I envision is I meet somebody who has a different point of view from me on whatever, or I meet an alt-right troll, and I want to listen sincerely, and I'd love the system to say, if the other person had used the similar sort of system for a while, I'd love for the system to say, hey, I've discovered already that you all seem to agree on these 8 things, and you seem to disagree on these 5 things. And here's a way that you could walk through experimenting, questioning, whatever, the places where you disagree, but you should celebrate your agreements. And I've kind of mapped them out for you here. I think that is a really interesting opening for a much deeper, much more interesting conversation. And if that can be done sort of in a semi-public way, or in a public way with listeners and participants, then it serves many more people who don't have to repeatedly have that same goddamn conversation over and over again, except for, of course, denialists and interventionists and whatever else. But at least, but one of my big questions here is, how much do these things just replicate and diverge out and create more and more, messy data for everybody to handle? And the more we can sort of nurse it back toward the center, I think the better.
And this is why topic merging is so important. What is topic merging is saying, well, this argument you're making is exactly the same you've made before, or that someone else has made before, which is fine, but and so if you find that this argument is the same someone else has made before, you should look at the counter arguments that already exist in the system. Yes. Radek, I'm not sure I've answered your question, however, because I'm not sure I understood your question. I hope I did.
As a very quick interjection on that, Jerry, this is the topic that I mentioned my 2 advisors from MIT, Henry Lieberman and Christopher Fry, have like really deep thinking about in a lot of prototype systems, and building a collaborative debate mapping system, as well as a chat bot that can say, hey, you know what, this conversation's been had before, are projects that I think are really low hanging and well specified to hack on whenever I have someone who's good at JavaScript who wants to hack on with me.
That sounds awesome. Could you share links about any of the people in the research in our private thing on Discourse? Thank you. Go ahead, Marc-Antoine.
I don't know how to do Discourse, but I can do email.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Radek.
Yeah, to some extent. I was thinking, though it's from the abstraction of the system, it's not obvious how to make actual mechanisms that would do what I asked about, and I didn't ask it in a very clear way as well. So yeah, all good.
I'm curious. No, Jerry, just to go back to Jerry's point about good faith, and I'll try. I'll try to reinterpret the question, Radek's question, otherwise after. But it is absolutely true, Jerry, that right now sense making has become an adversarial game. We are dealing with the fire hose of lies as a tactic, and and somebody has said fire hose of lies being fought with the squirt gun of truth. But I still do think that even in those circumstances, if there is, and that's the hope, Bentley, of the canonical debate, if we can have, well, this is this one place where we've looked at the argument, look at the counter argument, look at the construction, and we can easily muster the elements. And anybody who makes the argument, like they make it 20 times as a troll, but okay, it's in this one place on the map. It's again there. But it does mean, and you're right, Jerry, to ask, is it the same thing? Things diverge. People will come up with new streams and maybe that's your question, Radek. Everybody has a stream, everybody has a hypothesis, there's a divergent aspect to all of this. There's always going to be more data and more speech and more everything. I do believe that while the streams diverge, the topic maps doesn't diverge as much, because once you start unifying the topic, the resulting map, there's not that many moves in the conversation. And this is why you can have divergence of events and topics, and still, when you federate them, say, well, it turns out that if you look through this filter at this set of topics, circumscribed set of topic, what was said fits here. So I don't know if that was closer to your question.
Yeah, this all makes sense to me. It's thorny. It's a giant hairball, but it makes a lot of sense. I appreciate deeply the work you and Jack and others are doing on this. Other questions, other thoughts? And Marc-Antoine, I've made you host, so you can close it down when I take off.
Marc-Antoine, when people are making these associations and stuff, have you thought, and maybe I'm leading down a bad path, but the confidence in those statements?
Right. Yes and no. For me, yes, there is a confidence aspect, but for me, that's because the link is a topic. I can make a confidence assertion about it because I can refer to it.
Right.
I say that the confidence of this link is 0.5, and you say that the confidence of that link is 0.2, because everything is addressable.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it can be expressed in the existing framework
without
having to be
including
designed.
a substream, which would be a sub-argument, for example. I could say that, I agree with you up to here, but then you said this, and I think that substream of logic was bullshit, and then we can kind of demarcate those things.
Exactly.
Cool. So everything else is SMOP, right? A simple matter of programming?
There's still a few conceptual problems, but I think I'm actually pretty close to the point where I can say most of it is SMOP. I can certainly do a lot of what I want to do as SMOP, yes.
I appreciate your good humor about that.
Are you looking for then funding to move? What's the next kind of step in getting this to move?
I'm looking for funding. I'm looking for allies. I'm looking for contributors. I'm looking for, I'm working on the prototype and trying to have more to show than just slideshows.
Are you going to put that up on GitHub?
It is on GitLab as we speak.
Or GitLab.
Have you run up a budget, and have you put up a Patreon page or any other kind of donation program?
No, I have a place where people can give me money, but I have not run up a budget because it's not quite well defined enough for that. Some of the programming problems, I have an idea. I'll be very honest. Right now, my limiting quantity is my own time because my health has been difficult. And I think it's going to be under control. I have apnea. I'm waiting for a machine. And I hope that it will make a difference.
Okay. Yeah.
But that's been my issue, really.
And there's maybe two different kinds of budgets to think about. And there's probably many more. One of them is a budget for project to completion, like what would it take to do all the moving parts. I don't mean that so much as what would it take to keep you working on the project happily. Like what's a run rate that lets you, and you don't need to say it here, but I'm really interested in that because I'd love to fill sort of a tank of fellow funding through OGM, where we can actually funnel money to people like you who are working on important projects that are part of this. And I'd love to go out and pitch that to people who have money that might want to fund projects like this. So I would love to build that bridge somehow. And so in order to do that, we would need individuals to say, you know, this is kind of where that would fall. But that's a piece of what I'm aiming to do.
I hear you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob.
I will try to make that.
And I have to bounce on the call at this point. So go until whenever, until you're done. But I'm going to go to these links and then bounce for a moment. Thanks, Jacob. And thank you all.
Thanks, Trey. Hey, Jacob, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Do you have my email? Are you on the thread?
I am on the, yes, I will go pull it off the thread, of course. It's a good idea. Some people don't read their email, so I just want to make sure. That's
yeah,
cool.
I just sent an email to the calendar invite thing that pasted all these links as well. Okay. And anyway, these guys are just great guys. Generally, people I think have the right ideas, and I think talking with them in some ways feels a lot like talking with you guys. And they're in the position of academics at, they used to be the Media Lab, now they're at MIT CSAIL. Basically, they put out prototypes and white papers in grand visions, and that's their whole job, is to create these grand visions. And then it's up to the rest of us to go execute pieces of these grand visions. And Henry Lieberman, incidentally, was the co-inventor of garbage collection. He wrote it for language Smalltalk in the 1970s. Wow. He's a classic legend. Programming, and Fry is his research partner of many decades, and they're both fun guys.
Awesome. I don't have anything else. I don't know if anyone else has any other questions or topics for this week.
Well, Linus, you still around?
Yeah.
So, I was thinking, it's interesting. I mean, this went a bit different than usual. I guess I'd be interested if anyone cares to reflect on what the biggest open gestalts from previous conversations were, or like what were the biggest things from, like, say, last week's call that stood out on anybody's mind, because it's probably worth continuing discussing, and maybe it would also catch Linus up. And I don't have very long either, but at least to set the table.
Oh, so Linus, is this your first call? I actually don't think we've ever met, but
I was on a few weeks ago, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, once.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so we're off and on. I got connected through Jacob. Yeah,
just to follow up.
Yeah, go on.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, just to follow up from last week. I think Bentley checked in some of his code for the WebBrain export stuff, and I think we both dropped in some JSON nodes into our into the repos on the GitHub group. And so if anyone just does want to like spelunk through, I don't know, it's like 20 or 30 JSON files or whatever, you know, that's I think that lets anyone sort of play around with the subset of that.
Who's running the GitHub right now?
Quite a few of us have admin access, so it's whoever wants.
If you could add Linus, it would be great.
What's your GitHub?
I can send it in the chat.
That'd be great. We'll add you in. And we're keeping it private at the moment, just because we don't want all of Jerry's data to be, it's open on the web, but we don't want to make it too easy. So that's why it's a private repo and not a public.
Maybe I have a question. What do you all think about this?
That's a good question.
It reminds me a lot of Git, immutable event streams. I think it's interesting. I'm curious. It reminds me of Git. It reminds me of Datomic and Datalog. I thought your choice of GraphQL as a model for query language instead of Datalog was interesting, because Datalog is much closer aligned to the claims and validating claims idea.
I did say this was one of the most tentative parts, and I don't think it needs to be one query language either. So, and I certainly like the idea of also using Datalog.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also looking for something familiar to a lot of people.
So Mark, what I was noticing this pass through it is that you're actually kind of detaching the meaning from the language, from the symbolic language completely, right? So,
yep.
I mean, it really could be a whole new language instead of Paris, France. It's number, it's a GUID.
Sure.
So I just found that fascinating. It's a level deeper.
Okay, one reason, by the way, I didn't get into that, but I don't know if you've looked at IPLD much, and I don't know if you know about, okay, IPLD is, it's a derivative of IPFS. IPFS is content addressable files. So you take the hash of the file, and it's, because it's SHA 256, it's supposed to be almost certainly unique. And so the SHA of the file gives you a handle to the file. So they're using that even with small little JSON blobs. And so you have a JSON blob that happens to contain in some of its content references other SHA handles of other JSON blobs. So you have a traversable network of JSON blobs. Each one is very small, but it's potentially infinite network. And you can do path queries on that. And the intuition I found interesting about this is not so much, I mean, JSON-LD, all that has to be profoundly immutable. And that's, I want my events to be immutable, but I see the information around the topic to be ultra immutable. But what it tells me is, if I have a claim, if I have a relationship, if I have, this is connected to that, that is a micro claim. And that micro claim, I can take its signature, and it becomes, if I take its hash, it becomes its identity. And that identity is unique. And that means I can put it in the index, and I can even find it reused across the index. Now, again, I don't expect one vocabulary to rule them all. That's an anti-goal for me, because I expect vocabularies to diverge on the one hand. But I do expect that, so often people will converge on vocabularies as the vocabularies develop and gain prominence. I'm very much saying, I don't believe in ontologies because it's not true that you can know everything that there is to know at the outset. But I don't believe in cloud tags and folksonomy because they're too vague. But if we can have an ontology core, and then by accretion, as things get defined, they'll get added. So what I'm saying is, if we have a vocabulary that stabilizes, that means that even very high-level claims about this, that uses those terms, will end up having a unique identifier, not just the relationship name, but the fact that A is connected to B. It will have a unique identifier by virtue of being a hash of things that have these names, shared names. This is not something I want to count on, but it's something I hope will make the system behave better in time when it happens to be true.
Awesome. Well, I've got to head to bed.
It is quite late for you, yes.
Yeah. Mostly because I'm old. All right.
Yeah, so is this time better for people or worse? It doesn't matter too much to me, it turns out, because I'm usually up pretty late anyways.
It's probably a little rougher for me. but not substantially. So
same.
Gotcha. And Mark, what time zone are you in?
Eastern.
Eastern. Okay.
But
Gotcha.
I'm an early bird.
Yeah. Oh, and you mentioned, well, I guess, we could cut this recording off or whatever, but you mentioned you had some apnea. Is it obstructive or central?
Obstructive.
Okay. Yeah, so I had OSA. I was able to reverse it basically just by, making some changes for metabolic health. But sadly, I'm, in Japan right now, because otherwise, if I was in my storage unit, I could just mail you my old CPAPs.
I'm supposed to get one Thursday.
Okay.
It just took a year.
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
Thank you. No.
Cool, but I'll send you some stuff offline just in case you're interested in looking at some things that are different from CPAP or surgery, but that might help.
Thank you. Okay, so do we wrap it up?
Do we have any action items or agenda for next meeting? Or moving forward at all?
I think we had mentioned, I said I'd do my thing and somebody else would do his thing, and I don't remember whom. I wonder if it was Bentley, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my end, I'm working on other stuff. I do have, I did dig out all the old code I had, and I wasn't personally so interested in the visualization part of it. But, I think I did add in some references for if anyone is interested in that. Anyways, did Bentley jump off already?
Personally, Leonard, I'll mess around with anything. So always interested.
Okay, and pretty much everyone's doing JavaScript and Python. Sort of works for everyone.
I know JavaScript and Python. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, have a good night, everybody.
Okay.
Have a great night.
See you guys.
Yep.
Bye.